All right, welcome to the Golden Belt Buckle podcast. Thank you for watching today. Today we're going to talk about Tamara Lich. She is, in my opinion, to me, she's a national hero, okay? Because she laid it all on the line for the Freedom Convoy, and now she's kind of paying the price for it, right? She's awaiting her sentencing. She's been found guilty of mischief, and she's awaiting her sentencing on October 7th. And, you know, basically what it looks like the prosecution did, it looks like they just took a bunch of charges and tossed them at her, because, you know, that way if you don't get what you want, you're going to get something, right? It's kind of like tossing a bunch of spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. That's kind of what they did with the charges. They just hit her with a bunch of charges to see if one of them would stick. So in light of all that, I want to talk about her background a little bit, and by knowing her background, actually I shouldn't say background, I should say context. I want to talk about the context that she came from, and then we can understand more about some of the things that she was involved in leading up to the convoy and then beyond. So, because being from Southern Ontario, you know, we joined them. Like, I didn't go to the Freedom Convoy. I took place in a lot of the local contests, or local protests around my area, but I didn't make it to the Freedom Convoy up in Ottawa. I was there on the side of the 401 cheering all the cars on when they went by, but I didn't make it all the way up to Ottawa. So, yeah, so anyways, I didn't understand much of where she came from, right? And I think we all had different motives. Well, we had one big motive, but they had the motive that the Freedom Convoy was started was because our government decided that, I think they said you would have to quarantine for 14 days if you came back from across the border from the United States, which they knew. If you didn't get the vaccine, right, they knew that would put truck drivers out of business, right? It was targeted at them to make their life inconvenient and ruin their lives, right? You will either get the vaccine, or if you don't, when you cross that bridge, or you cross into the States, you come back, you got quarantined for 14 days, which is not going to work, right? So that is what caused the Freedom Convoy to be organized to begin with. And then from there, various other groups attached themselves to it for their own motives, right? Which were very similar motives. We wanted the lockdowns to end, right? And so, as a result of that, she was arrested and charged, and the process has been her punishment, right? So we're going to talk about the context that she came from, and I'm going to give you my conclusions before we even get into it. That way you can see where we're going with this, because we're going to talk in the next episode about Trudeau. But I think when I start researching this, I think Trudeau has had a deep-seated hatred for the West since he was a kid, because apparently his father, now I'm too young for this, but his father was the one that started the National Energy Program, and it says it was sought to secure Canadian energy independence and redistribute oil wealth by taxing Alberta's oil revenues. And this led to a disaster. There's a lot of details about it I don't understand, but it was supposed to be a nationalistic movement, right? But it ended up ostracizing Alberta, because they got the raw end of this entire deal, and people lost their houses. It was a mess. So Justin's father ended up having a lot of protests going on all around him. I'm sure Justin would have heard his dad going on about these Albertans and their bad attitude and their unpatriotic behavior, and you know, he probably got a lot of his attitude from his dad regarding them, just because he was living. He was living in Ottawa with his dad that whole time. So he already had a bias against the West, I'm going to guess. That's my hypothesis. But what I think is also reasonably certain, though, is that by the time Tamara led the Freedom Convoy, he already knew who she was, because that wasn't the first time that they had met. They had dealings before. this itself probably explains why he didn't want to talk to anybody. He already had a bias against the West, but by the time the Freedom Convoy was organized and it got rolled to Ottawa, he had already concluded everybody involved in this, they were all a bunch of racist, bigots, xenophobes, so all of us coming up from Chatham, that you're lumped in with them too, right? You're the fringe minority, right? And he didn't want to deal with them. So another conclusion was that if Alberta felt like they were alienated beforehand, they probably felt even more alienated after this. So one of Trudeau's own cabinet members even came out and criticized him, telling him he's escalating the situation in Ottawa by ignoring the protesters. So that's the cash value, and we're going to talk about how we got there. We're going to talk about Western alienation. Easy thing to do is to talk about Albertans and say they're a bunch of racists, right? That's what a lot of these articles say, right? They're just a bunch of racists, right? Xenophobes. But I came across an essay that's a little bit more credible, makes more sense of these complex issues to a guy like myself. Professor Loline Berdal, she's a professor of political studies at the University of Saskatchewan, executive director of the Johnson Shyama Graduate School of Public Policy, 2020 to present, and the former head of political studies. So she's been writing on Western alienation, I think she said for 20 years. Now, Western alienation is it is like it sounds. It's the feeling that the West is alienated from the East. The West is alienated from central Canada, right? But she defines Western alienation as a critical response to the center-periphery dynamics of Canadian politics. Excuse me. Western Canadians then and now chafe at being treated as peripheral in their own country and have used various strategies in their attempt to redress their treatment. Her definition of Western alienation to me is it's chock full of things to chomp on here because, okay, so they feel alienated, that much is obvious, but then when you consider what she says, they feel like they're treated as peripheral in their own country. What does that mean in the light of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? I think if you were to ask a Western Canadian, do you feel like you're included in this democracy? I imagine a lot of them would say no, right? We feel like we're largely ignored in Canadian politics. I mean, after all, let's take a look at this. All the seats to decide an election are primarily located in central Canada, that's Quebec and Ontario, right? So, I mean, what voice do we really have? What representation do we really have in Canada? And she goes on to say that in Canada, actually, let me back up a bit. She says for central Canada, every day is 1867. Okay, so Confederation. She says every day is 1867. Always has been, always will be. You read other articles, they say, well, this is just Alberta is being racist, and since the 1950s, we're moving beyond oil and beyond their natural resources, and it's nostalgia for them, right? Well, no, this is a different conclusion. She's saying every day in Canada is 1867 to Ottawa. In other words, they're always, everything that defines what it means to be Canadian, she says, it's all defined from a perspective of someone who's from Ontario or Quebec. And so, like, for example, she used the example, what does it mean to be a Canadian? Right? And the anti-Americanism, she's like, well, that's not our culture, right? That's your culture, right? Ontario and Quebec, from the War of Independence, we've got blood-stained borders, she says. They didn't have that, right? Now, that's true. Like when I'm being from Southern Ontario, and reading up on the history of our military, that's why we had so many, like we used to have military bases all up the Thames River, right? Because we were waiting to be invaded by the Americans, right? So there was a time when we had animosity with the States, and she's saying that's not really that's not really how they feel in Alberta. They don't feel anti-American like we do. They don't have the same history as we do. And she says in her concluding remarks in this article, she says, Further, in a period of growing global political polarization, there are risks to ignoring discontent. If one wants to understand Canada, one must acknowledge that regional disputes are situated in our different understanding of Canada. Without this starting point, we will simply have the same debates in perpetuity, and the cost to Canada may continue to grow. She's saying, like, what she's saying there is that in every part of Canada kind of has its own history, right? They have their own discontents, they have their own issues, and it's not about a matter of someone just being racist, right? It's just every place has their own issues. Now, she mentioned in another paragraph about Southern Ontario, she says, Southern Ontario is the only place that she found that doesn't have these kinds of discontents that you'd find, like, say, in Alberta. And that's fascinating to me because up until the lockdowns, I don't think I ever felt like I had that discontent, right? I never knew it was like to be on the peripherals. I never knew it was like to be discriminated against by my government. I never heard the saying essential and non-essential before, right? And I could clearly see that the non-essential classes, they were out protesting, and I stood in solidarity with them, right? The vaccine mandates. I've never seen a vaccine with so much controversy as this one, and that led a lot of people not to want to take it. I'm the only one in my family that got it. I wouldn't let anyone else get it because, for all the reasons you all know of, right? There's the concern that it wasn't tested properly. There's a concern that the Americans, they had this reporting website. It was called VEERS. I can't remember. It's an acronym, right? VEERS. But there was always an update on all the vaccine injuries that were going on, and so a lot of people didn't want to take it, right? And so watching all your friends, everybody is like, papers, please. And everybody's okay showing their vaccine papers as if this is some kind of normal thing to be doing. Here's my papers. And then, people being all right with watching their friends have to eat outside if they were still going to restaurants because they weren't allowed in the doors. It just blew my mind. People were okay with that kind of thing, right? Neighbors informing on their friends and family because that guy's got too many cars in his driveway. He must have guests over. We got to call the police on him. We got to be good citizens, right? Just the sheer idiocy and the sheep-like behavior of everybody. I'd never seen it before. The idea, if you just walk a certain way around the grocery store, you're not going to get COVID. You're not going to die. If you just do these weird things we were doing, and I'd never felt like I was on the outskirts. And now I think about this. I'm like, well, number one, I understand how, when I'm reading history, I understand how the Jews probably got ostracized in Germany, and I understand human behavior, how it is that one people group can be conditioned by the government to hate another people group and isolate that group and even get rid of that group. I had a friend tell me that anyone not vaccinated, the government's just going to have to round everybody up. I had just sat at this guy's dinner table and he sang this. He knew my family really well, and he sang things like that. Like, he would have been willing to see my family lose everything, get put on a cattle car and taken out of here, put in a camp for not getting vaccinated. Like, we were just friends, not even a month before that. It blew my mind, right? The sheep-like behavior people had. So I'd never seen that before. But if that's any indication how Albertans feel, right? Maybe they always feel like that, right? It sounds like it's a perpetual feeling out west that Ottawa just doesn't care about them, right? And they didn't just have it from a period of like 2020 to 2022 or whatever. They had, sounds like it's a perpetual feeling that they always have. That their needs are not the same as Ottawa needs and Ottawa's needs, and Ottawa is always dictating to them things that are not in their provincial interest. They complained about the equalization payments, tax dollars taken out of Alberta's revenue and then distributed all over Canada to help other provinces keep their social systems going, right? And Alberta's like, we give you all of this money, and at every turn, you're hamstringing our economy behind our back. Like, you want our money, but you won't give us pipelines to get our oil to market. Make that make sense, right? It's that kind of thing that seems to really chafe at them, right, is what they're saying, right? So that, as a result of this kind of alienation, they're not really taken seriously, or they feel that way. That they don't have as a result, this has led to the Yellow Vest. It's led to the United We Roll. It's led to the formation of different political parties, separatist parties. It's led to the Freedom Convoy, and Tamara Lich was involved in all of them. So that's pretty much, that is the background of everything. And I didn't mention that, like, one other thing that she mentioned in this article was that the federal government employs over 300,000 people, right? And just over 230,000, they work in core public administration, and 70,000 in separate agency. The bulk of whom are skilled workers were located in the national capital region, so like in central Canada. This up from 33% in 95 to 43% in 2006. Excuse me. And then the question is increasingly concentrating Canada's policy-focused knowledge jobs so heavily in Ottawa Gatineau in the country's best interest? So I mean, it's just, they don't have much representation, right? That's what they're complaining about. And it's led to, like I said, the Yellow Vest, United We Roll, various parties, and Tamara Lich has been an organizer in like all of these. So by the time, yeah, we're going to talk about that next time, but that'll be what we're going to talk about next time. So now you should have some kind of an idea where I'm going with this. So anyway, till next time, cheers, keep the rubber side down.